This is Charles,
This is Emanuel.
and you are listening to
Blight Makes Right.
the original Legion of Everblight podcast.
I
I get
am grinning from ear
I
to ear. Oh
got
my
the
God.
warm fuzzies and stuff going on.
Yes.
Uh, so it's interesting, Emmanuel, since when you and I first started podcasting, at that moment, you and I both played Legion of Everblight, right?
It's
Like that
true.
was our home. That's how we got to know each other, was writing Legion articles back in Mark II. And then, if you recall, when you and I were gonna like start our first podcast, we're like, well, let's do a general podcast, right? Because
Yeah, definitely.
because you know that way we have like 20 listeners instead of like four, right? Like,
Hey,
that
that's a
was
big deal.
right. That was the thought process at the time. It was like we should not do something, even though all of our articles and all of our content at that point had really been
And
Legion.
everybody who knew us.
Yeah, like our whole initial fan base was all Legion. But like we're gonna do a general podcast, right? We're
Hmm
just gonna talk about everything. And that very quickly became like, hey, we should probably not both be focused on Legion, right?
We were playing the
And
same casters too.
yeah, primarily. Um, and so I remember like some gentle pressure where I was like, Emmanuel, I'm not switching, right? Like, I'm
Gentle pressure is
yeah.
a light way of putting it, but yeah. You were totally like, hey, so I don't think we should both play Legion, and I'm not switching. What do you think? And I was like, you bring some valid points to the table, but it's not hard for me to have faction ADD. Like I can be faction focused, especially for competitive seasons and stuff. But I like to explore the game vicariously. So
Right. I remember there was something to the effect of, doesn't Gatsby 2 look broken as shit? Wouldn't Crix be a marvelous home for you?
I think I went to Menoth after that. Menoth and Trolls.
Mm.
Because I got Hungerford sent me a Mountain King. It was the like first
Mm.
non PP Mountain King.
You're right, you're right.
And
I do think Trolls may have been the first place.
yep, and then I got the extreme Mauler, and then after Trolls, like quick jump into Minoth, and I was off and running.
Yes, like all out there. As you then had the faction ADD through all of our episodes,
Hundreds of
really.
episodes, yeah.
I mean, I dabbled in Crix and Scorn and a little bit of Trolls and Circle, but I mean, I think really the only factions I really brought to a few other tournaments ended up being Crix and Circle. But I like 99% of my games were Legion.
The only factions I didn't play in a tournament were Minions, which I never owned or played Minions as a faction.
Yeah.
And the newer factions that came out like right there at the end. But basically, everything else I played in competitive formats with competitive people, competitive mindedly, um, and played through most of the
Competitive
Warcasters.
mindedly. I like
Yeah, I really shouldn't have said that. That was real bad.
that.
Can
It's
we?
all right.
I don't know if we can edit this. I don't know how that's gonna work. We used to just like cut stuff out, but now it's like
Oh,
a
in the
video.
in the video portion, there's not a lot we can do, but in the
Yeah.
audio version, everybody will get like the manufactured version.
Okay, I like this. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, that I played through everything.
All right. So I guess for the listeners out there, if you have never listened to one of our shows before, I started playing at the 2011-ish. I forget. I think I picked up the game at the end of 2010, and I think I was really starting to play at the beginning of 2011, and then I went to the Lock and Load 2011, played some games, but I didn't really do tournaments, and
Yeah.
then but I will back it up one step. The moment where I was hooked, it was like I think it was Christmas time, 2010, something like that, or the might have the years off. But I was reading a battle report from a TempleCon, and it was JVM versus Jason Watt. And at the time, I was playing both Scorn and Legion, so I thought it was the coolest thing in the world that I was reading this like
That's what I'm
massive
playing
battle
now.
report, right? Like this massive battle report from these two incredibly talented players. And I was enthralled with this idea of faction mastery. And then I was like, I'm committing, I'm going to do Legion. And then it was all downhill from there. Like tournaments and travel and well,
Downhill from there. I like how you put that.
yeah. But took a couple of years off. Now I'm back, setting all sorts of goals for myself as a player who was previously uh, in the Iron Gauntlet World Championship, in the World Team Championship, and in the War Machine Weekend Invitational all in the same year.
Mm.
There's a high point that I want to get back to that, and I wasn't ready to come back until I knew that I could put in the time to get back to that point, because it takes a lot of practice and a lot of investment in thought, even outside of playing games. A huge amount of time you have to spend just thinking about the game. So
You were not wrong.
I'm excited to get back to that. But you should talk about you, because you are
Whew.
prettier.
Oh, I don't know about all that. But so to take you through my history in a quick jaunt, I've been playing since Mark 1. I picked it up towards the end of Mark 1 when shit was just bananas and everything was broken.
I forgot that you played in Mark 1.
I did. I also played through the transition and the beta phase of Mark 1 to Mark 2 when Mark 2 was a thing. And then played all the way through Mark 2. We podcasted about halfway through Mark 2. I was a press ganger, die hard. I mean, you were a judge, not to mention.
Yeah.
Back out there. And I was really focused on community events for a long time and hobby. And then I started getting more into the competitive side as I started to form teams. I traveled a lot for my work, and because I traveled wherever I would go, I would meet the most competitive minded players and say, hey guys, let's get together, let's talk strategy, let's talk tactics, let's play through the matchups, let's figure it out. And I met some amazing people along the way, and all of them helped me grow and become a better player. And I mean, probably my best claim to fame would be LVO. My team with Jordan Ock and Tony Faber won the team tournament. We ended up knocking out some pretty big names in that event too. It felt good to have practiced for an event, worked as a team, and then gone and executed and done exactly as we had practiced, just against players that validated the amount of time and effort that we had put into it. And then from there, we started to focus on kind of expanding Hand Cannon Online and took the full mantle of all of the podcasting
Yeah.
and all of the editing and all of the producing and all the content creation. People don't realize that even if Charles and I weren't on podcasts back in the day, we would be sitting there for hours discussing with other hosts what the content should be and how they could shape it, and the ins and outs of do's and don'ts, and things you can do to be better, and things we learned in our first year and our second year and our third year and our first 100 episodes and our second 100 episodes and our first seasons and different things like that. And so it was just a massive, intensive time investment for everything all the time. And at that point, the game had become something that I did as almost like, am I blowing off steam when I'm playing this game, or is this game becoming the thing that I have to go and do as like the job? And so taking a sabbatical from that was much needed. I went and played 40K for a while, and just kind of as a palate cleanser to remind me why I play War Machine. No offense to 40K. Like, I really enjoyed playing 40K, and I had a good time learning from other people and seeing tactics from a different side of things. As far as strategy goes, that's really like my bread and butter. Even growing up as a kid, studied tactics, from books from every corner of the world I could get my hands on. Then I joined the Army, and as a Cav Scout, I pushed every boundary I could so I could learn as much as I could. And then when I got into War Machine, it was like, how can I apply this encyclopedic knowledge of tactics to a game that has its own encyclopedia of rules? And that, became the challenge for me. And so coming back into this and having gone and played 40K and done some other things, I have a very different approach now. I used to, and we can get more into this as we talk about our play styles, I used to approach the game very differently when you and I first met, as under Blood Wrath, I guess my forum handle. I was a very aggressive player, and I played very much like my forum handle. And these days, it's very different.
All right. Well, let's talk about the draw to Legion, right?
Yes.
So, this as a faction obviously has always been my home, and even though it was the very first models that I purchased, the very first game I played, all of my convention tournaments have been Legion. But now that we're coming back and it's Mark III and things have evolved, there's new factions. Like faction identities have shifted a little bit. And so there's
Yeah.
definitely been a part of me that's like looked at some stuff and been like, man, like Grim can look pretty cool. And you know, I would totally play Adjudicator. Like that model seems
Just
ridiculous.
one?
Yeah, no, I would be that guy. I would play two for sure.
Totally.
I love all of the big awesome stuff.
Me too.
Um but even though there's that experiment, like I love the Legion of Everblight community, and it's always been a special place, and I love the aesthetics, and even though some of the faction identity has evolved, there's some things that have come back in that was never really there before. Like, sure, at the end of Mark II, like we were seeing some War Spears lists and such, but honestly, like Thagrosh and the Ogryn were a big part of what pulled me to the faction. So coming back now and seeing Primal Terrors all over the place and seeing these new chosen models that like bring something new and interesting to Legion and this, you know, this theme force that emphasizes these things, it's a very, very exciting time. And I feel like to a certain extent, we are at the point where this is kind of the end of Mark III beta. Like, I feel like 2019 is really the beginning of Mark III in a very developed sense. And I'm really excited to come back in and tackle Legion because I remember in Mark II when I started playing and I was reading the forums and everybody was saying that Legion is just an assassination faction. And JVM wasn't quite as loud as he is now, as he was then. He was kind of like, no, I play for attrition. And people didn't quite get it. And it's just the community at large was like, we're an assassination faction, you know, we're two glass cannon. Yeah, like we get torn apart. And I was like, no. And I remember coming in and all of my Bethane tech doesn't apply anymore, but I was like really big on playing Bethane at first. And I was like, we can wipe out all the infantry. There are ways to do this. And then it was like, yes. And then JVM started like, you know, showing people more of the ways and the things that he was playing. We stepped into the age of more broadcasts, more videos. And, you know, we were doing all sorts of battle reports. And it was like, this is how you take apart somebody's army. You know, mind you, there was a lot of new casters at the time, Bethane, Callus, Veil 2, that really started pushing those things another level on top of it. But I'm happy to come back now and kind of dig deep, like having that time to like step back and just be like, things are the way that they are now, kind of come back with fresh eyes and kind of go, what do I think will work in what meta we have now? What are the attrition lists? What are the scenario lists? And I'm excited to dig for those things and see what we come up with. Obviously, I love JVM's Callus list, and I hate it so much at the same time because I think it's perfect. And so I'm excited to play that, but I'm also excited to see what else is out there. But you, however, have dabbled in way more factions than me. So I'm curious what made the Legion, what tentacle dragged you into this?
You're the tentacle that dragged me into this, but I mean, we can get into that. So overall, like, why play Legion Dragons? Like, I love the dragon theme. I love the Cthulhu theme. Ogryn, like you said, was one of the reasons I played. Thagrosh 2 was like the first Legion model where I was like, I have to have this. I have to own this. It must be in my collection. And when I played, I was in the same vein as you. You were like, wait a minute, we're more than an assassination faction. We can play attrition just well. I played a lot of like Thags 1 back then with the pod and just like endless recycling. And you're like, man, I can create a lot of free models. I can get a lot of free points every turn. I can take a lot of things for free. Like I can just like armor pierce and repulse and refuge away and be scot-free. And you could just get way high up on the attrition slide. And that's something that's always appealed to me as a player. And when I was playing 40K, I was playing a very heavy attrition Death Guard style list with lots of tanks and just like, you know, see how much I could slog through on the table. And the game was so massive that learning the game was much kinder on an attrition player than, you know, say somebody who was playing a game that was trying to end it quickly or leaf blower, so to speak. And when I was talking to other players about the state of the game, I asked players, I was like, "What's the new attrition list? Like, what's the best?" I was playing, Bradagus World War back in the day. Where's the apex predator? And everybody was talking about um, basically animeg this and chosen that, and oh my god, I can't believe how good warmongers have gotten. And I'm just like, what? And then people are raving about the Carnivian and new character beast, and the Hellmouths being just ridiculous, board presence. And I'm like, we're talking about Legion, right? I don't remember none of this. None of this is, and that was, part of it's a twofold benefit of being your friend. And that first, you pushed me the fuck out of Legion, brother, and that was fine. Like there may not have been room for the both of us in that town back in the day, but coming back to it, I have not played since Veil 2 and Callus were the new hot casters. So there is so much I have not tried and I have not played. And then coming back into Mark 3 and seeing how much they've changed, it's a lot for me to dive into, and that excites me. And they're one of my I don't want to say they're my favorite faction, because there are a few people out there listening that might get a little offended, frankly. But they're certainly up there.
Well, I think it's one that, for a faction that you've loved so much, it's ends up being a faction you've explored very little compared to a lot of the other ones. As I
It's
think it's
full of
probably fair to
Hamilton
say.
faults.
So you held back on probably exploring this one a lot because of me. So it's
Mhm.
really interesting now that we had to come back and we had to kind of do Blight Makes Right, which is really probably the project that we should have started with.
Probably, yeah.
And I didn't realize how much I would enjoy doing it until Blight Makes Right started. And I'm sad that Lucas and Jake Shearer, who had started the project
Yeah.
with me back in the day, are both off, doing other things and not able to contribute to a
Great and
podcast at the
wonderful
moment.
things.
But still, much love for all of my BMR guys, and it's cool though that you and I get to come back, start kind of from the beginning, but not the beginning.
Yeah.
So,
What the true beginning.
all right. So let's talk a bit about um, play styles and what we're looking to do now, coming back to Legion right now. And I'm gonna force this one on you first, as opposed to me
Are you
gushing on
sure?
this. Yeah, I'm gonna
Oh
bounce
man.
back and forth a little bit. So
Okay.
let's hear, like, what are you looking to do on the table?
Well, I kind of touched on this a bit in being an attrition player, but I would say that I'm a very in the moment player. My playstyle tends to be very flexible, and I pick apart my opponents. So whatever the situation brings me, I go, okay, what tools do I have to solve the problem? How can I define this situation in a way that makes it more easy to solve? And is there something here that my opponent may not have considered? And that's typically how I approach every game. But going into it with Legion, it's hard to say that I have a specific playstyle right now, because the sky's the limit.
Right.
If I were to define my playstyle in a nutshell, it would be very calm and methodical and tactical. I tend to, like, where other people will commit. If it's not going to win me the game to commit, I may back up. I've played a lot of games recently where sometimes backing up is the exact right play. I play a lot of chess, and so I make a lot of chess metaphors. And so I tend to also play and develop strategies in the way you would in chess, just because the basic fundamentals are the same. And that's how I approach a lot of things, and using outside experience, whether it's tactics from the military, or whether it's my studies on historical tactics, or it's just my approach on gaming. I basically try to do it that way.
Seems reasonable. To avoid like totally just saying the same thing as you, obviously my focus in Mark II was Veil 2, was the caster I played more than any other, and also Veil 1. And so both of those, to a certain degree, were designed to be very heavy attrition lists that had both an assassination threat and really powerful scenario plays so that I could shift my game plan at any moment.
Totally.
And, if I found that they were playing really heavily on attrition and they exposed their caster, I would reach out and touch somebody and just be like, all right, you're going to pay the price for going to that extent to try to get that attrition advantage. Or vice versa, if they're trying to play really dodgy, like, then I will just switch to like, okay, fine, I'll play for scenario, right? Like, and I'll just go up on points on you and I will play that way. Um, and so I like that versatility of being able to play stuff that can change its game plan, that can play a variety of routes. I was never quite the person that was like, this list is going to go for scenario every single time. I didn't really like playing that way. I did do it a bit with Absolonia 2, where it was very much like, I'm going to come forward, I'm going to murder whatever you have in the zone, and then I'm going to go up on scenario, and you can commit to the zone as much as you want, and then I'm going to murder everything. I will run out of steam eventually, but I just have to win on scenario before I do that.
For sure.
But at the same time, it's still a list that can, threaten attrition and threaten assassination at the same time. So I always hate playing the game with no assassination threat. That is the worst. I
Definitely.
hate playing the game when your opponent is like, I have no fear of you killing me. I hate that. Like, I feel like it's such a significant disadvantage for your opponent to be able to play like full steam all the time, where they're like, there's no threat of me dying.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, I need to put the fear of God into you so that
It's
you
like playing chess where your opponent never has to fear a checkmate.
right. And it's one of those things. I think keeping that fear alive is really important. So
Yeah.
for me, it is definitely about finding lists that can threaten that, even if it's not my first choice. I just want to threaten it to make people play safer, um, to give me other advantages. So that's one of the big things that I'm looking for. But I also am very much about target selection. And I like taking things from people that they don't want to lose. And so looking for good ways to do that, because I think that's been one of Legion's strengths, is being able to get to some of those juicy nuggets that are just behind the lines and things like that. Just getting the stuff that people don't want to lose.
Hmm.
Um, and vice versa, I always like to build lists that have a lot of twinning. I always like to double up on my win conditions. And I also found a lot of the time when I'm putting extra work into, like, I have two angels, right? Like, I have these defense 14, armor 17, very fast beasts. And I like leveraging that doubling up, because someone may have something that can help take care of one, but then once they use that, it's kind of expended and they may not be able to do it again. So I love having multiples of something where I can try to go, okay, well, you have something that can deal with one of these. Great. Now you've used it. I'm going to take it from you. How are you dealing with the rest of it now? And so I like putting people into that position of trying to force their tools into the wrong places.
I
So,
agree, definitely. I like to piece trade, and piece trading is an art, if
yes.
anything. You kind of dabbled into the list building portion of play style, and I think that's important to emphasize too, because you and I both enjoy list building and list chicken probably more than any other players I've ever met. We can and do talk endlessly for hours every day on Messenger and FaceTime, whatever we can get, about lists and matchups and how everything is going to play. So that portion is just very stimulating for us. And for myself, I didn't have a good way to put it until your podcast that you used to do with Sam Ross and Joel Presta, where you
Yep.
guys, what was that called? Into the Arena,
Yep.
right? And Sam used to talk about his hammer and anvil list approach. And I didn't realize that that's kind of my own approach. It doesn't have a good way to put it. And so I do like to have my list that can handle armor really well, and my list that can be just, I can wade into the combat and not have to worry about stuff, and it's my hardcore attrition list. I like to have a list that's like, oh, well, I don't have a good answer, so this is my assassination out list. All right. Well, my other list probably is not going to be my assassination out list if it's going to play heavy clean attrition or something like that. So, what's its other win condition? It's going to play on scenario. So, I need to use scenario pieces and focus on making sure that I cover the scenario packet, having pieces for all the flags and all the zones. And okay, what pieces, if I lose this, how do I cover that zone, with what models? And, how does this unfold? And so, the list building portion plays a lot into my play style, in that sometimes I straight beat people on not playing them, outplaying them on the list build, but having already thought about the matchup and where all my pieces go and how it's going to play out. And they're like, all right, let's play. You're playing this list. Oh, yeah, I've played against that a few times. And I'm like, mentally, I've played against your list about 80 times already. Because, I think I got that from Watt many, many years ago. We were sitting around at LVO, or no, it was Lock and Load. And Watt says to me, sometimes I just sit at home in my basement and I play games against myself for hours. And I was like, that's crazy and awesome,
Yeah.
because he's unfolding all these different scenarios and saying, well, what if this happens? How would I react? Well, how does that piece fall into this? Okay, well, now I've learned something from this. How can I evolve my list builds from this? And what did I learn about that? And so mentally, you can do that all the time. Um,
I
and so
compare it
that's part of
I
the
compare
hook
it to
too.
playing Magic, where it basically, until you can figure out what is the optimal block for your opponent, it's really hard for you to determine whether or not you should attack.
Yes.
Right? And so whenever I'm trying to construct something, like I want this to counter this matchup, not only am I thinking about what are they going to do in the game to potentially screw me up, like say, oh, I'm going to play a Throne of Everblight into Menoth because I want to RFP the troops
Yeah.
that they want to bring back with Hard Reclaimer's feet. And then I'm like, okay, well, if that's my plan, they're probably going to focus fire down
My
the
thrones.
throne. And so I've either got to have enough shield guards to keep it alive, or I double up and I bring a second throne. So even if they focus fire down one, I still have the second one. And then that detracts away from the beasts. But then I'm also thinking I go a step beyond that and I start building their list for them. I'm like, okay, well, if I'm doing this, like say I want to play Lilith 3 into the High Reclaimer, then they're going to shift towards making sure that they have magical weapons so they can get through Windwall. Or, if I'm going to play Callus 2 into Menoth, then my opponent may shift their game plan and bring a purification caster with double judicator, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
to remove the fire protection. And I'm thinking about what sort of thing can I do in a more long-term solution that they're not going to be as easy to counter. And so I definitely think about that. And when it comes to list building or list pairing, more so than list building, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is that I have two mentalities. And one is, I think, a very normal
Yes, I'm
mentality.
so glad we're talking about this.
Yes. I know this wasn't even planned, but I feel like it's a good topic for us to go
Yes,
into.
absolutely.
I think the main way to build lists, I think, list pairing, is you pick a list that you love and you want to master that list. Now that list may change. Like you have some people who are like, say, JVM, where that list is going to basically they'll figure out the list and then the list doesn't change. Right. But I was always very much like, I like Vale too, and I like all the things that she brings. But I'm going to bring slight variations on this list almost every time that I play it, like out of theme, in theme. What I was doing in Mark II, like every time I played her in a tournament, I was bringing a different version of the list. But it was slightly based on what sort of things I saw in my opponents, and that might be hex hunters versus more heavies, and there's all sorts of little changes that you can make, and then that list I'm going to master. I'm going to play it into most things, but then I'm going to pick something else that's going to cover some of my harder matchups, things where I'm particularly worried about something and I want to bring something to maybe to fix a problem with the scenario or fix a problem with, something that my opponents can do or try to scare them out of playing some lists. I think that's honestly the way that a lot of people build their list pairings. I think it's very common. You have your mastery list, the one that you want to play the most, then you have a second list meant to cover that weakness. But I also have a different plan sometimes. This is what prompted me in Mark II to play Veil 1 and Veil 2 together, which was I'm going to build two very similar lists that can solve problems just slightly different ways. Whereas, say, Veil 1 was solving problems with insight and like kind of sheer power and like one large feat turn of hit and run, whereas Veil 2 obviously is different than that, but could still run very similar lists. And you can still do that now and potentially run both of them in oracles if you want to. I'm not saying that's what you should do, but maybe there's potential to play, say, like two Primal Terrors lists, and but play them different casters with pretty different list makeups. Maybe something like David Smith's Thagrosh 1 list paired with Callus or an Animag or something else again that's very different, or maybe even expanding further into twins and play two lists that still may be Primal Terrors, but have slightly different advantages that can help fix problems with certain scenarios, like one has more solos than the other one.
We've
Something
talked
like that.
about this a lot, and I think it's really important to talk about the fact that when you bring two lists that are similar like that, your opponent tends to broadcast what they're going to use against you. In the
Yeah.
boxing metaphor, it's knowing which punch they're going to throw before they throw it. And I think that you can target the weaknesses of their broadcasted punch, so to speak, and say, all right, I know you're probably going to play this caster. It's got the answer to both of these two lists, but it has this one specific weakness. And I have my whole two list spread to choose which has the right tools. And that's one thing I really like about the tiers now that you couldn't necessarily do in, say, Mark II tiers, is that you can have two casters play almost the same list with just some small switch outs, and the list function greatly different, but you have all of those benefits from it that you're like, okay, well, these are just solid benefits I like from this tier. So I like that aspect of at least where Legion's at.
Right. And I think it's very easy to sometimes look down at a list pair and go, okay, that's what they want to drop into Primal Terrors.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be because it's a mortality caster or it's something that shuts down healing and they're looking to counter the chosen play, right? Where then you could potentially play something, well, instead I'm going to do the Thagrosh one with all of the Ogren, like all the Warmongers, like David's list as another repeating his example,
Mm-hmm.
where that's not going to be as vulnerable to mortality as, say, the list with running double chosen. And so I think there's some very interesting play there. And I don't know if that's going to be my plan now, but it is a potential plan that I think is worth keeping in mind.
I'm gonna try it for sure. Like
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna try it because I think there are a lot of casters who Primal Terrors being a good example, but any tier list who can run the same tier but different. And as far as like a competitive tournament goer, always thinking about how much bag space am I taking, how transportable is this? Like we had that discussion on almost day one
Yeah.
when you're like, I want to bring Callus Primal Terrors and Absolonia with like two battle engines and two gargantuans or something, and you're
Yeah.
like, I can fit this in my bag, right? No, Charles. I'm sorry, you
Yeah.
can't.
It was like, all right, I have this two list pairing in my mind, and I may have picked it with absolutely no model crossover whatsoever,
Yeah.
and both taking up a huge amount of space that might be basically impossible to travel with. I might need to rethink this plan. But I think
Great
that's
list
actually,
pairing, though.
yeah, I think that's a good segue into let's talking about which warlocks we want to focus on.
Yeah, all right.
Um, because part of that kind of goes along with that strategy of like, hey, right now, if you're a Legion player, you may want to be starting off with which Primal Terrors list am I going to focus on that's going to be part of my pairing, because it is a very strong list. And so you may, like for myself right now, where I wanted to start with, once I was starting to get into tournaments again and starting to get games again, it was, well, what's going to be my Primal Terrors list? Do I want it to be Callus? Do I want it to be Animag? Do I want something else? And so that's where I'm starting. And I might go to a tournament here in a week and just bring two different Primal Terrors lists and just see which one did I find myself wanting to drop more often and why, and help that be part of my plan. And that may also be like, well, do I like playing two Primal Terrors lists? Does it have too large of a weakness that I have to put something else in there? So I'm very interested to experiment there. But why don't we start off with you? Which of the warlocks are you most excited to start playing?
My number one warlock I want to play is Callus too. Like coming back
From
to,
Hamilton.
I know my
Yeah.
Hamilton sculpts in general are my favorite. I love
Yeah.
Hamilton as a person, and I love his sculpts. But Callus 2, I really like Callus 1 a lot in Mark 2. I played him a lot. I played him when he was basically just like, hey, I can create incubi off troops, and
Yeah.
people were like, that's amazing. He's got dark guidance and all that, but Callus 2 has a special place for me because as a cavalryman in the army, I have a special place for cavalry casters. I love them. I've played basically every single one I can get my hands on, especially the battle engine cavalry casters. And to find out that Callus had basically become this half dragon, half knight cavalry monster, I was like, yes, please.
Yes.
And then I looked at his card and I thought, oh no, I'm definitely not going to play Callus 2. What is going on here? What? And I remember sending you a bunch of random questions like, how does this work? Question mark. What's going on? I don't understand this. And then I spent a few days thinking about it and then I was like, not only is he a really versatile and interesting caster, but I think that he can be played in a very Butcher 3-esque way where his threat is just being able to be leveraged across the table if you want it to be. And that's scary. And I'm going to play the shit out of it.
I might actually compare him more to Gorshade 3 than Butcher 3, where he
Sure.
doesn't have the extreme murder potential of Butcher 3, but he definitely can support his army pretty well and do really cool things. But then suddenly he's like, all right, it's my time to get involved. I'll murder something and back up, or kill your caster. Or you're just like, oh yeah, this is not just a support caster. This is a dude who does work.
I agree. I think he can do all of those things, but it's the intimidation factor. So I played with and against Butcher 3 a lot. And it's like in the world of I can measure everything out, you're like, oh, well, let me put all the sticks out and just remind you, this is the death bubble.
Yeah.
If you get within
this is my death. This is danger zone.
you die. Yeah. And Callus is like a
Danger
20 threat range
Yeah.
base. Like, I mean, the dude's a monster. And I think that a lot of people will be caught unaware by how unlinear that is, how you can clear space with Primal Terrors and some of these other lists and get him in there and get it done. So I'm gonna play the shit out of him. He's top dog on my list.
Number
How about
one,
you,
number
Charles?
one.
Who's numero uno?
Well, before I had the Primal Terror stuff, obviously Absalonia 1 like hit home pretty quick. I was like, ooh, we got Refuge back. I'm all
Yeah.
about this. And I've always wanted Wild Aggression. I always thought that was a great spell. And I really like the overall changes to Absalonia. And so I brought her to, like, my very first coming back to the game, I was like, I'm going to play in an Iron Gauntlet qualifier. That's how I'm going to get back in the
Welcome
game.
back.
And I got into the top 4, which surprised the hell out of me. And then was still holding on. Like I had an Absalonia 1 list, and it was carrying me and helping me get through my mistakes and my slow play. But I'm definitely excited to do some more stuff with her, and I have some ideas. But I kind of broke away from that for a bit because I wanted to figure out which of the Primal Terrors list I wanted to do, and the Chosen are such beautiful models. But I'm like, there's more options than just that. So I've played Animag a bit, I played Callus a bit, but I want to keep experimenting and keep trying both and see which I like more. There's just so much to bring to the table. So it's been a lot of painting, a lot of experimenting. But I've always liked Callus 1. He's someone I brought. He was in my very first tournament pairing ever, I believe, was Bethane and Callus, and so he's always had a special place for me. And now, but Animag really does it all, which is very interesting. Like really strong feet, great spell package. I like the fact that she can cast a spell out of her activation. Like I'm totally in love with this idea because you can trigger Ritual Slaughter off of a Vengeance attack.
Yeah, buddy.
And so that's something that interests me so much. Where you're like, well, Vengeance on these Mat 6 guys is not really that great. Like maybe something's also in Gorag's aura, or maybe you still have the Veteran Leader bonus, so maybe they're Mat 7, maybe they're Mat 10. But the idea where you're all of a sudden like, well, this guy's going to take the easy kill on this one model. Boom, now I've killed something. And like I haven't even like leached Fury yet, and you're just like, now I'm gonna cast Carnage.
+2 for everybody.
Like, we haven't even gotten to like, that could be really interesting, like because that could apply to your frenzies.
Yeah.
You're like, I have cast Carnage now, but this amuses me greatly. But anyway, I think there's a lot to her there, and there's a lot of depth to it. And I like casters like that, and so that could be my home too. So we're gonna have to figure it out. So I'm in love with Absalonia 1. I think it's a fantastic caster, and she's definitely in my heavy process mode. And then it's what do I want to play running Primal Terrors, and that could be multiple lists.
So
So
who's your next Primal Terrors game? Who are you gonna drop if you had to go and pick one of those casters and drop it now?
right now, would probably be Animag. My last few games were Callus, and I'm starting to get a feel for it, and I like it. But I wanna switch back, and I wanna try Animag. Just see, Grievous Wounds is real good,
Mm-hmm.
real good, and I've been seeing that in a lot of games, and I think that's just like ignoring tough and like being able to go in on a jack and then not have to worry about finishing it off necessarily. There's a lot of advantages there. So as much as I love Callus, I want to give Animag some more table time. So that's definitely going to be high on my list.
I will be playing. Excuse me. I will be definitely playing Animag, but mostly at the request of my opponent. Going, I need to learn how to
Yeah.
play against her. I want to see what lists I can beat against her. And like you said, she's good. She's easy to put in there. Really interesting all around caster. But my number 2 and number 3 caster. So my number 2 caster has got to be Thagrosh 2. I absolutely love the guy. Manifest Destiny. Like I don't care what anybody says about where he stays in the meta or anything like that. He's amazing. I think he's awesome. And when I saw that he got better, I was like, they made Thagrosh better. Really?
Yeah.
Like Tickle Me Pink, my favorite caster got better. So um, he's really high up on the list for me for sure.
Well,
Thag's one's an obvious.
I think Fagrosh 2 is a very interesting place because there are multiple people that I've seen say the same thing. And these are the people who played Fagrosh 2 the most in Mark 2 have been like, even with his increases, they still haven't found the list or the home or the pairing that makes them want to play Thagrosh 2. And I think that's interesting because everybody who played him in Mark 2 seems to feel that way. In a lot of ways, like purely if you're just looking at his stat card, it's like 100% better,
Yeah,
right? Like sure he lost the unnatural aggression spell, right? But that's not that big of a deal. Like that was never a huge part of his game plan. And so but now his stats are better, he's faster, and he's got so many interesting support tools. So I definitely have a Fagrosh 2 list where I'm like, Fagrosh 2 with sprint seems dumb. And so we'll get into that more later, but I he definitely interests me, and he's always kind of interests me. Like Fagrosh is one of the things that pulled me in the game, which is why like I found this shirt. I was like, I'm ordering that right now. I want
Thagrosh
my
for
Fagrosh shirt. Um, so okay, well, so we've touched a
he
bit
kept
on
Aggravator, by the way. He still
yeah,
gives. He can give out hyper aggressive.
right, but the spell before that was unnatural aggression, which was a
Oh yeah,
pseudo hyper aggressive sort of thing. It was
yeah.
a very different spell, but I mean, it's different, but he didn't really like lose anything in a negative way.
It's true.
Um, so one of the things that we always did in Blight Makes Right, and obviously we should bring it back, is we should have our BMR moments. Right?
Totally.
That was how we ended
Wait,
shows.
this is gonna be my first BMR moment.
Well, I don't know. You haven't played much yet, so I'm not sure you have a BMR moment.
No, I don't. I don't have a BMR, man. I don't even know really what a BMR moment is. I didn't really listen to BMR back in the day. I'm not gonna lie. So, like, I mean, I wasn't allowed to play Legion, you filthy Legion blighters, but you had some really amazing guest hosts on it, and the original Blight Makes Right, and had some really relevant topics. So I'm honored to be part of the first
Well,
Mark III Blight moment.
yeah. So I guess for the listeners and for anyone who does not know what a Blight Makes Right moment is, when when we began BMR, there was this idea like people hated playing against Legion. Like we weren't cricks, right? Like we didn't people didn't hate us as much as cricks, but for the most part, people were always like, "Oh, you won this game because Legion is bullshit." Not like you got outplayed or anything like that. And so there was always this like negativity where people felt like they were being like blamed because they played Legion, and it was trying like people were sapping the fun out of a win for somebody because it was Legion and Legion was bullshit and Eyeless Sight. And so I wanted to spin that a whole nother way. And I was like, you know what? When someone gets salty because you're playing Legion, fuck that. Blight makes right.
Blight makes right.
And so, um, so we kind of had this ongoing joke that whenever something crazy happens and you get to do those really cool Legion shenanigans, and that's how they end the game, that you would, just be like, well, when this happens, Blight makes right. And so I did get to have a wonderful Blight Makes Right moment during my first tournament back.
Okay, tell me about it.
Okay, so when your opponent pops Kalandra's feet and shoots your Blightbringer off the table, and then kind of passes the turn and kind of is like, well, what are you going to do now? And you look down at the table and you're like, well, I'm going to activate Absalonia. I'm going to put Wild Aggression on my Nerf. I'm going to slipstream it forward. I'm going to pop feet, heal it back to full. And now it has rapid healing. Then I'm going to use these other guns, pop, fill up this little hole for the Nerf to land next to Kalandra. And then I'm like, well, I can't clear everything. So charge in, takes a free strike, takes out Spirit, but I have rapid healing. So whoop, I get Spirit back after it lands.
Yeah, buddy.
And, she's like, well, I want to make sure you're aware. It's like, I've got Puppet Master up, so I've got to reroll. She's like, just remember, like, she's being super nice to me. Like, she's like, I know you haven't played in forever. Like, I have dodge, right? Like, if you miss an attack, I'm just going to walk away from you. And I'm like, well, I double check my card. And I'm like, well, I have coil. So as long as my mat 7 with an additional die to hit and a reroll hits, every single other attack is going to auto hit.
Yeah.
And coil, tap, take the head attack, buy one more attack, like it was a free charge, tough check, dead. And it was just like
juicy.
Blight makes right.
So good.
Yeah.